We often think of national debt as a modern problem, but the mathematics of compounding interest have trapped empires for centuries. The real story is not about borrowing too much, but about the quiet arithmetic that makes repayment impossible long before the bills come due. Of the Sovereign Promise, I'm Ben, and this is Historical Resonance. Our channel explains history through the lens of economics and finance. Today we examine a pattern that has shaped civilizations for millennia. The interest death loop begins with a simple promise. A sovereign state borrows money to fund essential projects. This could be a war, a public work, or a famine relief effort. The borrowing makes perfect sense at the time. The state issues bonds or promissory notes. These documents promise repayment with interest. The interest rate seems manageable. It might be 3% or 5%. The debt appears as a temporary bridge. It connects present need with future prosperity. The lenders are often wealthy citizens or foreign banks. They trust the state's ability to repay. This trust is based on the state's power to tax. The state controls territory and people. It can collect revenue through various means. This revenue stream backs the debt. The system works smoothly for years. The state borrows for new projects. It pays interest on old debts. The economy grows. Tax revenue increases. Everyone benefits from this arrangement. The state gets immediate funds. Lenders earn steady returns. The public enjoys services or security. This creates a stable equilibrium. Debt becomes a normal part of governance. It is not seen as dangerous. It is seen as a tool for managing time and resources. The mathematics of compound interest operate quietly in the background. Each payment includes both principal and interest. The interest portion grows slowly at first. The principal reduction seems adequate. The state's credit remains strong. New lenders continue to offer funds. The interest rates stay low. Noble. This encourages more borrowing. The cycle appears sustainable. The state's economy expands. Its population grows. Its productive capacity increases. All these factors suggest the debt can be managed. The sovereign promise seems ironclad, but this stability contains a hidden flaw. The flaw is not in the borrowing itself. It is in the relationship between growth and interest. Economic growth happens in fits and starts. Interest compounds with mathematical certainty. These two rhythms rarely align perfectly, yet the system depends on their alignment. For now, the alignment holds. The state meets its obligations. Confidence remains high. The machinery of debt continues turning. No one questions the fundamental arithmetic. They see only the surface success. The debt grows, but so does the economy. This appears to validate the approach. The state becomes more sophisticated in its borrowing. It develops a treasury department. It establishes regular debt auctions. It creates different bond maturities. All these innovations make the system seem more robust. They create the illusion of control. The reality is more subtle. Each innovation adds complexity. Complexity creates new points of failure, but these failures remain hidden. The interest payments flow smoothly. The principal gets rolled over into new debt. The state's balance sheet shows both assets and liabilities. The assets are future tax revenues. The liabilities are the debts owed. As long as the former exceeds the latter, all seems well. This is the economic order that precedes every interest death loop. It is a system built on trust and mathematics. The trust is in the state's enduring power. The mathematics is the relentless compounding of interest. For a time, these forces work together. They create prosperity and stability, but their partnership contains the seeds of its own undoing. The mathematics never sleeps. It continues its steady work, multiplying small percentages into large sums, transforming manageable debt into impossible burdens, all while everyone believes the system is working as intended. The growth gap. The first signs of strain appear slowly. They manifest as a growing gap. This gap exists between economic growth and debt service costs. Consider a state borrowing at 5% interest. Its economy grows at 3% annually. This 2% difference seems small, but it compounds over decades. After 20 years, the debt burden has grown much faster than the economy. The state must dedicate more revenue to interest payments. This leaves less for other purposes. Less for infrastructure, less for defense, less for administration. The state faces a choice. It can cut spending elsewhere, or it can borrow more to cover the gap. Most states choose the latter option. They borrow new money to pay old interest. This creates a feedback loop. More debt means more interest payments next year. Those payments require more borrowing. The cycle accelerates. The mathematics become unforgiving. Each new loan adds to the principal. The interest on that principal must also be paid. The state's revenue grows, but not fast enough. Tax increases become necessary. Higher taxes slow economic growth. This widens the gap further. The state enters a dangerous phase. Its debt service costs consume a rising share of revenue. This share might start at 10%. It grows to 20%, then 30%. At 40%, the state faces serious constraints. It cannot fund basic functions without borrowing, yet borrowing makes the problem worse. The institutional friction becomes apparent. Treasury officials notice the trend. They see the numbers moving in the wrong direction. They propose reforms. These reforms aim to slow borrowing. They might include spending caps or debt limits, but these measures face political resistance. Cutting spending hurts powerful constituencies. Raising taxes angers the populace. The path of least resistance is more borrowing. The human consequence is subtle but real. Merchants notice higher taxes. They see the state taking more of their profits. They become less willing to invest. Farmers face similar pressures. They must pay more to the treasury. They have less to reinvest in their land. The economy's productive capacity stagnates, yet the debt continues growing. The state's creditworthiness begins to decline. Lenders notice the rising debt-to-revenue ratio. They demand higher interest rates to compensate for risk. This accelerates the death loop. Higher rates mean higher interest payments. Those payments require more borrowing. The state's position deteriorates faster. The mechanics of this deterioration are mathematical. They follow the rules of compound interest. A state with $100 million in debt at 5% pays $5 million annually. If it borrows that $5 million, the debt becomes $105 million. Next year's interest is $5.25 million. The required borrowing grows. The debt grows faster than linearly. It follows an exponential curve. The state's revenue follows a slower path. It might grow linearly or even stagnate. The gap between these curves determines the outcome. For a time, the state can mask the problem. It can use accounting tricks. It can shift debts off the official balance sheet. It can create special-purpose vehicles. These maneuvers buy time, but they do not change the underlying mathematics. The interest continues compounding. The gap continues widening. The state's options narrow. It cannot default without destroying its credit. It cannot pay without crippling its economy. It exists in a precarious middle ground. Borrowing becomes its primary economic activity. The Treasury becomes a machine for rolling over debt. Its main function is finding new lenders to pay old ones. Productive investment declines. The state's real assets deteriorate. Roads fall into disrepair. Ports silt up. Military equipment becomes obsolete. Yet the financial obligations remain pristine. They are numbers in ledgers. They demand payment regardless of physical reality. This disconnect grows over time. The financial world and the real world drift apart. The state lives in both simultaneously. It must service its debts in financial terms. It must govern in physical terms. The tension between these requirements builds. The growth gap becomes a chasm. The state stands on one side. Its creditors stand on the other. The bridge between them is made of promises. Those promises are becoming harder to keep. Monetary experiments. When the growth gap becomes unsustainable, states turn to monetary experiments. These experiments aim to break the interest death loop. The most common approach is currency manipulation. A state facing crushing debt burdens might devalue its currency. This makes the debt easier to pay in nominal terms, but it destroys the value of savings. Consider a state that owes $1 billion in gold-backed currency. It could switch to a fiat system. It could then print more currency to pay its debts. The nominal debt remains $1 billion, but the real value of that debt declines. This provides temporary relief. The state can service its obligations with cheaper money. The mechanics of devaluation are straightforward. The state declares a new exchange rate. Old currency is recalled and reissued. The new currency has less precious metal content, or it has no metal backing at all. The institutional friction appears immediately. Merchants must adjust their prices. Contracts written in old currency become problematic. Foreign lenders demand payment in stable currencies. The state's credibility suffers. The human consequence is inflation. Prices rise as the currency loses value. Workers find their wages by less. Savers see their wealth evaporate. The social contract phrase. People lose faith in the state's promises. Another experiment involves interest rate caps. The state might decree maximum allowable rates. This aims to reduce debt service costs, but it has unintended consequences. Lenders stop offering loans at the capped rates. It dries up for legitimate purposes. Productive businesses cannot borrow. The economy stagnates further. The state might try debt restructuring and negotiates with creditors to extend maturities. It might reduce interest rates temporarily. These measures provide breathing room, but they do not solve the underlying problem. Debt continues growing, just more slowly. The state's reputation as a borrower suffers, future borrowing becomes more expensive. Some states attempt more radical solutions, while debt. They might nationalize banks. They might seize private assets. They might impose capital controls. These measures address symptoms, not causes. They disrupt economic activity. They reduce the state's productive capacity. This makes debt repayment even harder. The monetary experiments share a common pattern. They attempt to alter financial reality without changing physical reality. They try to make the numbers work through manipulation. But the interest death loop is rooted in real economic constraints. It cannot be solved by financial engineering alone. Each experiment creates new problems. Devaluation leads to hyperinflation. Interest caps lead to credit shortages. Debt restructuring leads to loss of confidence. The state moves from one crisis to another. Its policy options become increasingly desperate. The Treasury officials know the mathematics. They see the exponential curve of debt growth. They understand that current policies cannot continue, yet they lack the political will to make hard choices. Cutting spending means angering beneficiaries. Raising taxes means slowing the economy. Defaulting means destroying the credit system. So they choose the path of gradual deterioration. They implement half measures. They hope for external salvation. Maybe economic growth will suddenly accelerate, maybe a new resource will be discovered, maybe foreign aid will arrive. These hopes rarely materialize. The interest death loop continues its work. The debt grows, the economy stagnates, the state's flexibility diminishes. Each monetary experiment buys a little time, but it also erodes the state's institutional capital. Trust in the currency declines, trust in contracts weakens, trust in the government's competence fades. This loss of trust has real economic consequences. People hoard goods instead of money. They invest in tangible assets. They move capital abroad. The state's tax base shrinks. Its ability to service debt declines further. The experiments become more frequent. Each one is less effective than the last. The state enters a downward spiral. Financial innovation cannot overcome mathematical reality. The interest death loop proves resistant to technical fixes. It demands either genuine economic growth or painful adjustment. Neither option is politically palatable, so the experiments continue. The deterioration accelerates. The end approaches, not with a bang, but with a series of increasingly desperate maneuvers. The confidence erosion. The loss of confidence begins subtly. It starts with sophisticated investors. They notice the state's deteriorating finances. They read the Treasury reports. They calculate the debt-to-revenue ratios. They see the growth projections. Their analysis reveals an uncomfortable truth. The state cannot grow its way out of debt. The mathematics do not work. These investors begin reducing their exposure. They sell state bonds gradually. They shift funds to safer assets. Their actions are not dramatic. They do not cause an immediate crisis, but they remove a source of demand for state debt. The state must find new lenders. It turns to less sophisticated investors. It might market bonds to the general public. It might pressure domestic banks to buy more. It might seek foreign lenders with different risk appetites. These new lenders charge higher interest rates. They recognize the increased risk. The state's borrowing costs rise. This accelerates the interest death loop. Higher rates mean larger interest payments. Those payments require more borrowing. The cycle intensifies. The next stage involves currency markets. As confidence erodes, the state's currency weakens. This makes foreign debt more expensive to service. A state that borrowed in foreign currency faces particular pressure. It must earn foreign exchange to make payments, but its weakening currency makes exports cheaper. This should help, but there's a lag. In the meantime, debt service becomes crushing. Domestic confidence follows foreign confidence. Citizens see the currency losing value. They experience inflation firsthand. Their wages buy less each month. They begin to question the state's management. They lose faith in official statistics. They trust their own experience instead. This psychological shift has economic consequences. People change their behavior. They spend money quickly before it loses value. They avoid holding currency. They convert savings into tangible goods. This behavior fuels inflation. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The state's response often makes things worse. It might impose price controls. It might blame speculators. It might resort to propaganda. These measures address symptoms, not causes. They further erode confidence. The institutional framework begins to crack. The legal system struggles with contract enforcement. How should contracts be valued during rapid inflation? Courts face impossible questions. Businesses delay investment decisions. They wait for stability that never comes. The economy stagnates. Tax revenue declines. The state's financial position deteriorates further. The human consequence is anxiety and uncertainty. People cannot plan for the future. They live day to day. Long-term projects are abandoned. Education and training suffer. The society's human capital deteriorates. This reduces future growth potential. The interest death loop tightens its grip. Each round of confidence erosion makes recovery harder. The state loses credibility with each failed experiment. Its promises carry less weight. Its ability to command resources diminishes, yet the debt remains. The interest continues compounding. The state becomes trapped between mathematical reality and political reality. It cannot satisfy both simultaneously. Though it satisfies neither. It makes partial payments, it misses deadlines, it negotiates extensions. Each delay adds to the uncertainty. The financial system adapts to this uncertainty. Lenders build risk premiums into all loans. Interest rates rise across the economy. Productive investment becomes unaffordable. The economy's growth engine sputters. The state's situation becomes desperate. It might try one final confidence-building measure. It could appoint a respected finance minister. It could announce a bold reform program. It could seek international support. These measures might provide temporary relief, but they cannot change the underlying mathematics. Unless they address the growth gap, they will fail. The erosion continues. It becomes visible to everyone. Shopkeepers post prices daily. Workers demand wage indexation. Banks refuse to lend for long terms. The financial system prepares for collapse. It does so quietly through countless small adjustments. Each adjustment makes the system more fragile. The state stands at the center of this erosion. It watches its tools of governance become ineffective. It cannot borrow without paying punitive rates. It cannot tax without crushing the economy. It cannot spend without fueling inflation. It has entered the final stages of the interest death loop. The mathematics have won. The only question is how the end will manifest. The inevitable resolution. The resolution of an interest death loop follows mathematical certainty. The state reaches a point where continuation is impossible. This point arrives when debt service consumes all available revenue, or when lenders refuse to provide new funds, or when the currency becomes worthless. The exact trigger varies. The underlying cause does not. The state can no longer service its debt through normal means. It faces limited options. The first option is explicit default. The state declares it cannot pay. It suspends interest payments. It might repudiate the debt entirely. This option destroys the state's credit. It cannot borrow again for a generation, but it provides immediate fiscal relief. The debt burden disappears overnight. The state can redirect revenue to other purposes. The mechanics of default are brutal but simple. The state issues a proclamation. It cites force majeure or national emergency. It offers creditors partial payment or nothing. The institutional consequences are severe. Domestic banks holding state debt face insolvency. Pension funds lose value. The financial system freezes. Credit disappears from the economy. The human consequence is widespread loss. Savers see their bonds become worthless. Retirees lose their income. Businesses cannot obtain working capital. The economy contracts sharply. The second option is inflation-driven default. The state prints money to pay its debts. This causes hyperinflation. The currency loses value rapidly. Debt becomes trivial to repay in nominal terms. But it becomes impossible to repay in real terms. Creditors receive payment in worthless paper. Their real wealth is destroyed. This option preserves the form of repayment while violating the substance. The mechanics involve the printing press running continuously. The state issues new currency to meet all obligations. Prices rise hourly. Wages cannot keep pace. Economic calculation becomes impossible. The third option is restructuring with coercion. The state forces creditors to accept new terms. It might extend maturities by decades. It might reduce interest rates to near zero. It might convert debt into equity in state enterprises. These measures spread the pain over time. They avoid sudden collapse, but they represent a de facto default. Creditors receive less than promised. The state's reputation suffers. Future borrowing costs remain high. The resolution phase reveals fundamental truths. Debt represents a claim on future production. When that production does not materialize, the claim cannot be honored. The interest death loop occurs when claims grow faster than production. The resolution realigns claims with reality. This alignment is always painful. Someone must bear the loss. It might be creditors through default. It might be citizens through inflation. It might be both through restructuring. State's role changes during resolution. It transforms from borrower to crisis manager. It must allocate losses across society. This allocation determines political outcomes. The state that manages resolution poorly faces revolution. The state that manages it well might survive, but its economic power will be diminished. The resolution marks the end of one cycle. It clears the balance sheet for a new beginning. The debt burden is lifted or reduced. The state can start fresh. But the memory of the crisis lingers. Future generations will be more cautious about debt. They will impose stricter limits. They will demand more transparency. These reforms might prevent another death loop, or they might simply delay it. The mathematics of compound interest remain unchanged. The temptation to borrow remains strong. Ethically could begin again. The resolution phase teaches hard lessons. It shows that financial promises cannot exceed economic reality. It demonstrates that growth cannot be assumed. It reveals that confidence, once lost, is hard to regain. These lessons are written in the ledgers of history. They appear in every civilization that faced the interest death loop. The details differ. The mathematics do not. Historical insight. The interest death loop is not a modern invention. It appears throughout economic history. Consider the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. The state faced massive military expenses. It borrowed heavily to fund legions and fortifications. The debt grew faster than tax revenue. Emperors resorted to currency debasement. They reduced the silver content in coins. This was a form of inflation-driven default. The result was economic disruption and loss of confidence. The empire never fully recovered its financial stability. Medieval kingdoms faced similar patterns. They borrowed to fund wars and crusades. When repayment became impossible, they defaulted on Jewish bankers. This pattern repeated across Europe. The defaults provided temporary relief but damaged credit systems. The early modern period saw more sophisticated versions. The Spanish Empire borrowed against future silver shipments from the Americas. When the silver flows diminished, the debt became unsustainable. Multiple Spanish monarchs declared bankruptcy. The Dutch Republic developed public debt markets in the 17th century. It maintained confidence through transparent accounting and reliable taxation. This allowed higher debt levels without collapse. The system worked until wars overwhelmed it. The French monarchy in the 18th century provides a classic case. The state borrowed to fund wars and court extravagance. The debt service consumed half of royal revenue by the 1780s. Attempts at reform faced aristocratic resistance. The result was the French Revolution and debt repudiation. The 19th century saw repeated sovereign defaults in Latin America. Newly independent states borrowed for development. When commodity prices fell, they could not service the debt. British and French investors suffered losses. The pattern continued into the 20th century. The interwar period featured multiple European debt crises. The Great Depression made repayment impossible for many nations. The post-war Bretton Woods system aimed to prevent such crises. It provided stability for decades, but the fundamental mathematics remained. The oil shocks of the 1970s triggered new debt cycles. Developing countries borrowed heavily. When interest rates rose in the early 1980s, defaults followed. The pattern appeared again in the 1990s with the Asian financial crisis. Excessive borrowing led to currency collapses. The 2008 global financial crisis revealed similar dynamics in advanced economies. The interest death loop operates across time and political systems. It respects neither ideology nor culture. It follows mathematical rules. These rules are simple but powerful. Debt grows exponentially when interest compounds. Economic growth rarely matches this pace. The gap between them determines the outcome. History shows that states can manage this gap for a time. They can use financial innovation and economic growth, but eventually the mathematics assert themselves, and bend your burrow, death loop closes. The resolution is always painful. The insight for modern observers is not about predicting collapse. It is about recognizing the pattern. When debt service costs grow faster than revenue for extended periods, pressure builds. When monetary experiments become frequent, confidence erodes. When growth depends on continuous borrowing, sustainability is questionable. These are historical warning signs. They have preceded transitions in 1929, 1982, and 2008. The interest death loop reminds us of a fundamental truth. Financial systems exist to serve real economies. When they grow disconnected from productive capacity, correction follows. Correction realigns financial claims with economic reality. This realignment is the historical constant. The specific mechanisms vary. The underlying mathematics do not. This is the enduring lesson of the interest death loop across civilizations.